Okay, welcome to the virtual conference hiring, choosing the right person for the job. Go ahead, Pastor Thompson.
All right, good morning, everyone. We want to welcome you all aboard today. Um, all of our panelists, everyone who's watching online. My name is Xavier Thompson, and I serve as the senior pastor of the Southern St. Paul Church here in the city of Los Angeles, as well as, more importantly, for this event, I have the wonderful privilege to serve as one of the COC commissioners, and I will be your moderator today. I want to welcome each of you aboard to this COC's virtual law enforcement reform seminar entitled Hiring, Choosing the Right Person for the Job. As we get started today, allow me to give a shout out to our capable and esteemed executive director of the Oversight Commission, Mr. Brian Williams. Also, I want to recognize and salute our very intelligent chair lady of our Civilian Oversight Commission, Patty Giggins, as well as my fellow commissioners who serve on this COC. My job today is to keep the train on the railroad tracks. More than ever, there's a demand for law enforcement reform, especially in this hour, in this season that we are in. And I want to assure and reassure everyone who is listening to us this morning that the Civilian Oversight Commission of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department is wholly committed to being a part of making reform happen. Leadership is partnership, and that's what we endeavor to do on today. This seminar is just the first step of a million-mile journey, if you will. Today's seminar will focus, as I said, on hiring, what makes an ideal candidate to serve as a officer in law enforcement. And it is my sincere hope that by the end of this seminar today, we will have discussed the attributes and characteristics, if you will, the traits that make a good candidate, as well as expose some of those red flags that we should look for when evaluating a candidate who is in the application process. So, my job is to keep the train on the railroad tracks. Having said that, let's buckle up. Everyone, put on your seatbelts. We are clear for takeoff. To help us do that today, our first speaker will be Dr. Sepideh Souris. I hope I'm not butchering that name. If I am, charge it to my head and not to my heart. She serves as the Chief of Psychological Services here in LA County. Also, Michael Rose of LAPD. We're going to introduce them more formally later on in the seminar. Commander Andrew Rosso and Greg Woods. But our first speaker, Dr. Sepideh Souris, has been a licensed psychologist for 23 years, has been with the County of Los Angeles ever since 1997. She is not just a psychologist for the county, she is the chief of psychological services for the past 16 years and supervises psychological services unit, which offers pre-employment psychological evaluation and psychological fitness for duty evaluation of employees for all departments and commissions. She serves as an expert witness in cases before the Civil Service Commission and the Los Angeles County Superior Court. In December of 2017, at the request of the United States U.S. State Department, she presented on pre-employment psychological evaluation of law enforcement personnel at the fourth International Conference in Mexico City, Mexico. Extensive expertise, extensive background, and we welcome you aboard, Dr. Souris. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Pastor. I hope everyone is doing well, and thank you very much for inviting me as a panel speaker to today's COC virtual conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for divorcing yourself from your busy schedule and favoring us as a participant in this forum. I got a question for you. When a pre-employment psychological evaluation is performed, what are you looking for? Anything specific that you are looking to find in a candidate?
Yes, and actually, let's start with our slide deck in some respect, and I'll be able to tell you exactly what we are looking for based on the governing statutes and regulations. So going with the first slide, actually, next slide. I'm going to wait a little bit until that happens. Okay. First and foremost, we need to consider what are the statutory and governing codes for us. In California, we are one of the few states, actually, because there are 38 states approximately who have required a pre-certification or a prerequisite for the law enforcement applicants in order to go through before they are hired. About 20 states, again, California being one of them, have required a distinct pre-employment psychological evaluation to be performed by a psychologist or a psychiatrist as the requirement separate from a medical pre-employment evaluation. California Government Code 1031, which is the governing law for us, requires that each class of public officers or peace officers be free from any emotional, psychological, behavioral conditions in order to be able to go ahead and apply themselves to their duties. Another way of talking about that is that the applicant needs to withstand the psychological demands of the job, with which we know there are many of them. This determination, again, needs to be made by a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And if you can go to the next slide, please. And in California, again, the evaluation, pre-employment psychological evaluation, which is very comprehensive, and I will discuss it a little bit more, is done by a licensed psychologist. The requirement for that psychologist is, first of all, to have a doctorate, be licensed in the state of California, have 5 years of training and experience in detecting, identifying, and treatment of mental and emotional conditions, and also know and have expertise in doing assessments and evaluations. And also California Post, which is Peace Officer Standards of Training, Regulation 1955, requires that each psychologist who is participating in doing pre-employment psychological evaluation or fitness for duty evaluation of law enforcement and peace officers to also meet the requirement of having at least 12 continuing education units in doing actual this type of work every 2 years. So again, the requirements for someone who is involved in that are many, and they need to be kept up to date. Now, again, to answer your questions. What are we looking for? Well, the California Post has gone ahead and made the assessment of personality characteristics somewhat more objective and measurable, and has come up with competencies that are based on personality characteristics that to make it more understandable in terms of what we are looking for or what a law enforcement applicant needs to possess before getting hired. If we can go to the next slide, please. I have gone ahead.
Dr. Souris, not to interrupt you, but I just want to put a pin here for a second. When you say personality characteristics that you're looking for, can you give us some specifics? For an example, i.e., what are those personality characteristics? And then I want to put an addendum on that, and don't want to hold you hostage here, but we talk about objective standards. How do we guarantee that they are objective and not subjective? Okay,
great questions. And the first one is going to be in terms of characteristics, and what they are going to be addressed actually as we go to the next slide. Can we move to the next slide where the California Post dimensions are exhibited? Okay. So in fact, we are looking for a person who has social competence, who has the ability to do teamwork, meaning that they are able to deal with different levels of individuals, whether it is a member of the community public versus someone who is their partner. They are adaptable and flexible. They are able to switch gears between what is required of them. They are conscientious and dependable. They are able to go ahead and look at what is in front of them, and also be able to be flexible in terms of how they are dealing with regulation versus something that is an emergent situation. They have to have impulse control and attention to safety. So someone who is able to control their knee-jerk reaction, look at the bigger picture and make a good decision rather than just going crazy when something emergent is taking place or something critical is taking place. Someone who has integrity and ethics, someone who is trustworthy, someone who is righteous, someone who is able to, again, be able to, when questioned, provide the right answer, not the answer that fits their purpose. Someone who has emotional regulation and stress tolerance, meaning that, again, in an emergent, stressful situation, they're not overreacting. They're able to have composure and, again, size up the situation before doing something that would harm themselves, a member of the public, or their partner. Decision-making and judgment to, again, be able to be aware and cognizant of the impact of their decision on the bigger situation and make the best decision. Assertiveness and persuasiveness. Being able to take control of the situation and assertively go ahead and be able to modulate the situation, and avoiding substance abuse and risk-taking behavior. So not engage in a behavior that would put themselves, the member of the public, or anyone else at risk. Those are the 10 dimensions, psychological dimensions, that each candidate should have in order to become a law enforcement officer. Now, how do we gauge that in terms of what you said as related to objective versus subjective? Well, there are the process of pre-employment psychological evaluation starts very early on. It starts with the actually background investigator because they are gathering information to fit into the 10 dimensions that I noted. The psychological evaluator, the psychologist, what they do is to thoroughly go over the background investigation and review that. Afterwards, they are to administer psychological tests that have been known to meet the quote-unquote gold standard. And again, these tests are objective and have shown to be reliable and valid for the peace officer candidate and incumbent population. After they get the results of these tests, they conduct an interview, which is comprehensive, which is to address any inconsistencies that showed up between the background investigation report as well as the testing. They also ask very in-depth questions as related to the social, developmental, educational, occupational, health and mental health history, substance use history, legal, etc., histories of the applicant. And all of this is to then be able to pull the sources of data from all of these different components that I mentioned: background investigation, testing, the interview, and any other relevant health records, to come up with convergent data, which is, one, is this individual free from any mental health condition, emotional or behavioral disorders as required by California Government Code 1031? And two, does this individual meet the suitability criteria as set forth by the 10 psychological dimensions that California Post Psychology Division has provided?
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for being thorough and comprehensive. I do have a follow-up question. What I see what I've learned, we have clarity of some specifics as it relates to the emotional and psychological and behavior conditions. Give us what are some DQs? What are some immediate, give us examples, if you will, just as you have for the conditions emotionally and psychologically, behavioral. Give us some examples of a disqualification, a red flag. What does that look like?
Red flag is when, as I was defining some of these dimensions, I hope that everyone was able to see that many of them are interrelated. So there is a domino effect that if you don't meet the integrity component, then you're not going to meet several other ones. For example,
yeah. So not to cut you off. So the integral and the ethical component, if we can just be as clear as we can of an example of that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Someone who has said one thing to the background investigator, okay, as related to, let's say, in terms of drug use, for example, okay, they have said one thing to the background investigator during their other testing. The testing shows some other results in terms of more extensive use, more recent use. And also when they are talking to the psychologist in the interview component, they totally bring up, again, a different amount of use, different number of drugs, and different, in terms of historical perspective, give a different history of it. So again, they have shown that they really are not upfront honest, okay, in terms of a very integral component, which is avoiding substance abuse and safety, as well as being honest and straightforward about it. That is the easiest example that I can give you.
Got you. Certainly, we appreciate your time. It's very critical, especially in this climate that we find ourselves in of law enforcement, to make sure that we are getting the best and the brightest to be added to law enforcement. At the same time, my concern is that the psychological examinations are subjective and not objective, and we are losing good minority candidates because of got you moments, for the lack of a better way to put it. To understand the dynamics of minorities, I just fear that we are losing good candidates because of subjective psychological examinations. And if we can, who monitor, I know the psychologist monitors and appraise the candidates. What accountability does the psychologist have? Who assesses them?
That's a very good question. Again, generally law enforcement agencies have contractors who do their evaluation. I think one way of monitoring or assessing is having an open communication, first and foremost, in terms of if someone has gone on to the academy and is not thriving, to communicate back to that psychologist so that they would know of other things to be aware of. The other way of monitoring is that when someone has, and again, this is indicated and required in California Government Code, or actually California Post processes, that when someone is found unsuitable as a candidate, they have a right to appeal that decision. And different law enforcement agencies have different processes as related to how that appeal process is done. I can speak comfortably for the County of Los Angeles and Sheriff's Department or Probation Department, which is when the candidate is notified of their being found unsuitable, that they can go ahead and request a re-examination. A re-examination entails the same components in terms of reviewing the background, reviewing what the original psychologist has looked at, the result of the testing. It also involves doing the same amount of testing in terms of 2 other tests that are administered and a psychological interview. And that part is conducted by our office in LA County Occupational Health Programs, Counseling and Evaluation Section, and as you mentioned, Psychological Services Bureau. So there is that ability that they have. I cannot say that we monitor the contractors of the department because we do not have that oversight component, but that is a chance in terms of that the candidate has that is at no cost to them for them to get a re-examination. So as you said, get a different set of eyes on them, get a different perspective on them. And that is, again, their ability, their chance to clarify some of the consistent or inconsistent things that had come up. I would say that, again, because of the fact that we have objective testing, it does not make the psychological pre-employment process a subjective process per se. And it is more objective because, again, as psychologists, we need to have all the data before we make a determination.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Dr. Souris. You've been very clear, very comprehensive, and we're better because of your participation. Thank you for joining us. I think I need to get to my next speaker right now, who is an analyst in charge of sworn staff hiring for the Los Angeles Police Department. His name is Michael Rose. Mr. Rose has been employed with the personnel department at the city of Los Angeles for approximately 5 years. His first 3 years were spent as an exam analyst for the examining division, which handles all civil service exams for civilian positions with the city of Los Angeles. Mr. Rose then moved to the employment services section, where he performed general recruitment. Mr. Rose has been in this current position as an analyst for the police officer examination since 2019. And as the analyst, he sees the police officer selection process for the Los Angeles Police Department, the Port Police, and Airport Police. And during such time, he has also acted as the supervisor for the recruitment team for LAPD and the Los Angeles Fire Department recruitment. I want to welcome to all who are viewing, all who are watching us, Mr. Michael Rose. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Pastor. Thank you for the introduction today. So I'll go ahead and speak on our hiring process prior to the academy. Starting out with our reading and writing component, that's meaning the post reading and writing requirements. That's recently changed. We had a personal qualifications essay for approximately 15 years from 2005 through 2020. That essay was replaced on June 1st by a multiple choice test. The multiple choice test was developed over the last few years by personnel staff with collaboration with the Department of Justice. The effort was to make a less subjective test. Our raters for the personal qualifications essay were trained, but there's still some inherent subjectivity there. Also, it's just a labor-intensive process, so that multiple choice test, the automatic scoring, made that a little bit more straightforward for us. So that process was started on June 1st, and that's the first step in the process. Once candidates pass the personal history statement, that's the first step in the backgrounds process. Candidates information regarding employment, living situation, family situation, providing contacts that the background investigator will use later in the selection process to complete the backgrounds investigation. And it's also going to be considered later in our polygraph examination. So after the personal history statement, the candidate has a few options. They can either go straight to the department interview, or they can go to our polygraph examination. If they go to the department interview, that's going to be the final portion of what we call our civil service selection process. And the score in the department interview is going to be what determines the candidate's place on the eligible list when it comes to certification for appointment. During the oral interviews, we follow the factors outlined by post guidelines. So oral communication, interpersonal skills, there's continuous learning orientation, job experience, how that's prepared them for the position, community involvement. So during that portion, they're also asked to complete a job preview questionnaire that is designed to give them an accurate representation of the position they're applying for. And raters on the panel consist of at least one sworn rater from LAPD. We try to have one sworn rater also from Port or Airport. That's not always the case, but we try to have them on there as well. And then one civilian representative from the personnel department are on the board as well. So if they decide to go to the polygraph examination, again, they have to complete both, but if they complete one or the other, it doesn't matter which order they take them. The polygraph examination, they'll be asked questions and related to the initial information they were provided on the personal history statement. It's used to verify that information. Again, it's an opportunity to explore the candidate's integrity. And it's another screening process just to verify the information we have, and it's going to be used further in the backgrounds process later. So once both of those test parts are complete, the candidate gets a conditional job offer. That allows us to continue with the remaining test parts. As a conditional job offer for us to finish the medical, psych, and background investigation. So the next step after they get the conditional job offer, they go straight to their medical evaluation. In the medical evaluation, they're determining that they meet the medical standards for peace officers. Their vision, their hearing are being looked at, their body fat percentage. Then also looking at a pulmonary test to make sure their lung function is up to standards. At that time, they're also going to be taking a psychological written test that will be used later for the psychological interview. Once they've passed the multiple choice test, they go to the backgrounds investigation. That is going to be handed over to a background investigator. That process can take 2 to 6 months, depending on how much information was provided in the personal history statement and how much candidate has contacts. That background investigation will look at previous employment, previous housing situations, family situations, or their marriages, divorces, and they'll reach out to any contacts that were provided in the personal history statement to verify the candidate's statements in the polygraph examination, and also the statements on the personal history statement. Once that field investigation process is complete, candidates move on to the psychological evaluation, and there it's going to be an oral interview with the city psychologist. City psychologist will be considering information that's provided in the written psychological assessment, as well as the backgrounds investigation, personally.
Are you there? Michael, are you there? I think his screen is frozen on my end. Staff, can you hear me?
Yes, it does appear that Michael's having some connectivity issues now.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, so much. Should I move to our next speaker?
I think that would be fine. When he comes back on, we can always circle back around with him to allow him to finish his remarks.
All right, good enough. I want to thank you so much. Such a competent staff there. We appreciate you. I think let's go to our next speaker, who is Andrew Rosso, who is a commander in charge of personnel for the Los Angeles Sheriff Department. Commander Rosso is a 31-year veteran of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. He is currently assigned as the Commander of Personnel Command, which oversees the Personnel Administration Bureau, Training Bureau, Psychological Services Bureau, Labor Relations, and Equity Compliance. As a Deputy Sheriff, Sergeant, and Lieutenant, Commander Rosso, his assignments has included, should I say, custody, patrol, and support units. As a captain, he was the unit commander for MetroLink Bureau and Contract Law Enforcement Bureau. Commander Rosso, good morning, sir. Welcome aboard.
Good morning, Pastor. Thank you very much for having me here today to talk on this very important topic, and thank you to the Civilian Oversight Commission for putting this virtual meeting today together, town hall, if you would. And again, my name is Commander Andy Rosso of the Personnel Command, and in particular today, I would like to talk about our Personnel Administration Bureau, Training Bureau and Psychological Services Bureau in particular about their role in the hiring and training process and evaluation of those members of our community that will end up and become deputy sheriffs in the county that we serve, all 10 million residents. I know Michael was talking earlier about the hiring process over at their agency. We are both regulated by the California Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission on our hiring process, and it is audited typically every 2 years by the state. And I'll go through what we do in our hiring process. However, Pastor, to answer your earlier question at the beginning of today's session, is I wanted to talk about who or what is our ideal candidate. The doctor talked about earlier about all the criteria that we look for, but we're looking for what I would just summarize as people of good character. That's who we as the LASD want in our agency as law enforcement officers and members of our department to serve their community in the various roles that we have, be it custody, courts, or in the field in patrol, or various other detective and other assignments we have in our department. And I would like to quote our department's core values, because this is kind of our guiding principle for who we want to hire and what we expect of the people that we hire. That with integrity, compassion, and courage, we serve our communities, protecting life and property, being diligent and professional in our acts and deeds, holding ourselves and each other accountable for all our actions at all times while respecting the dignity and rights of all. And so that's, I would say, for everyone, what guides our hiring process and who we are looking to hire. And I'll go through the steps that we have in our hiring process. First, obviously, the applicants have to apply, but we initially have them fill out what we call a supplemental questionnaire. So it asks about their history, any kind of substance abuse that they may have, any kind of interaction with the law, legal system, education information, their family information. And this we call as a supplemental questionnaire to do some preliminary screening before they even can sit to take the written test. And then once they complete the questionnaire and there's no issues that are identified, they sit for a multiple choice written test that we use, and then they do a physical agility test to make sure that they meet the job requirements to become a deputy sheriff, the physical requirements. And then after that, we do a structured interview based on and we use their screening or supplemental questionnaire. And we begin, once they pass a structured interview, that we end up and move them into the background investigation and polygraph process. During the background process, we end up and review several areas of their character, from interviewing former employers, people they live with, their neighbors, their references, and we ask them about this candidate to ask them about their character and if they believe that they would be suitable for law enforcement. And also during the background process, obviously, we look at records such as do they have issues with anything on social media that we might see from their past history? Do they have, is there something in their credit history that would disqualify them, that shows us that they may have a problem if it's in the recent history, obviously? And other things of that nature that we look at the whole person and want to assess them. And during the background process, we do a polygraph examination. And if further on during the process we determine there's a need, we can do a secondary polygraph examination if we determine there's something we want to look into further. But during the background, we ask that the candidate, the applicant, participate. Not right now, we're not doing it because of COVID, but a ride-along program where they go out and actually for a shift with a deputy in the black and white, and also tour of one of our jail facilities to make sure they have a fundamental understanding of what is going on. And that's in step 5 that Jennifer put up on the board here for all of us. And so once the background's completed at this point, we determine that we have, based on the information, a person of good character. We do a conditional job offer, and then through the support of occupational health and through the county, they go through a psychological evaluation that we feel it's a great assessment tool, and we have a lot of support from the county in this area. And also then we do a medical evaluation, as you can see, that assess that they're physically fit and ready to do the job of deputy sheriff, that they're physically capable. And then once they've passed these past 2 hurdles, the captain of Personnel Bureau does an interview. And again, throughout this entire process, their background, all the information is assessed on the individual. The personnel captain does an interview and then offers them a position to start the academy. And then that is not the end of the assessment of this person, because I would like to talk a little bit about what goes on during the training academy. If we could have the next slide, please. But before we go there, back up 1, please. I'm sorry. The sheriff has a couple of goals for us for our hiring as a department. We want to hire from the communities that we serve, that we feel it's best that people from the community, that law enforcement should have law enforcement officers that come from that community. So we have in the past, since the sheriff took office, we recruit local. We recruit in LA County. We recruit all over the place, not just colleges and universities, but those are a good target audience for us.
Commander, I don't want to interrupt you, but I am chopping at the bit, but I do want to come back to that. So I don't know when you want me to jump in, but I want to certainly give you the opportunity to finish that.
Well, I'll take a pause right here after this. And so we want to work towards diversity in our department that mirrors LA County as close as possible to the demographic makeup. It's a constant effort on our part to do, and especially with female law enforcement officers. In the past year, we inched up a few tenths of a percent above 18%. But we're striving to get 20% of our sworn positions to become female. So in our recruiting efforts, that's our target. However, with the current situation, with the state of the economy and everything else, our testing process has significantly slowed down, and we anticipate for this fiscal year that just started today to cut from somewhere from 1/3 to 2/3 are hiring in this current fiscal year, which obviously we work through with the county through the budget process. And I think this is a good point to pause for some questions.
Thank you so much, Commander. And again, we so appreciate and value your presence and participation in this forum on today. When you said so much, that was so much good stuff. And as much as I just want to make sure that there is some clarity, and we are not just talking the talk, but sort of walking the walk. You know, the Sheriff Department, you put words out about diversity, and want to make sure that we mirror the County of Los Angeles, that we hire from within the community, different local communities. And that is so critical in the climate and culture that we're in as it relates to law enforcement, not just here in LA County, but across the nation, as you know, to have members of the community representing the community. And when you live by that rule of law, so to speak, however, the flip side of that is that you have members of the community that is applying for law enforcement, but being kicked out on technicalities. Again, when you explore the candidate's integrity and review his or her background, for an example, when I say technicalities, you have good potential officers, particularly minorities, that are being DQ'd for technicality of a credit score, for an example. What do you do with that individual who is degreed, who is credentialed, lettered up, went to school, young minority, went to college, but was overwhelmed by the temptation of those on the college grounds to get a credit card? Now that good individual who lifelong dream perhaps is to be a sheriff officer, but they are DQ'd because of credit, because of a student loan, because of credit card debt. And I would just add to that by asking, what percentage of minorities, particularly what percentage of Black people, fail a background check or fail a psychological exam? And of those who fail initially, how many appeal and subsequently are approved?
In general speaking, from the graph we looked at previously, from the application to the hiring process, the overall number is about 3% of the people that apply get hired. And there's several times in the hiring process where they could be disqualified from the initial questionnaire to interviews, testing, psychological exam, background. And so there is a series of points in the process where we will disqualify a candidate. However, some of the things that I think you mentioned, that just because the candidate is disqualified at some point in the process does not stop them from pursuing a career with us, because what we try to look at is the most recent history with the person. And when in thing, and this applies in a lot of areas, but let's say it's credit or traffic violations or something of that nature, given time, depending on the severity of the stuff in the past, we would look at that and say, well, that's in the past. And now we want to look at what the person is doing today. So when we do have people that get disqualified, they can come back and apply a year or two later, take care of, work towards making things right. And we take that into consideration to evaluate the whole person during the process.
I love it. I love it. So they're able to be placed back in the process and subsequently.
Yes. Okay, Jennifer, if we can have the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about the training bureau. Okay, next slide, please. So the training bureau has a 22-week academy, and we cover a lot of topics. Over 800 hours of mandated state training, then more hours of department training. It's a 22-week academy that gives us a lot of time to assess the recruits. We have recruit training officers that go to post-mandated training to be a recruit training officer. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of the areas that we have: 50 hours of ethics, principal policing, and diversity training that we do that are part of post learning domains. And then we have many hours on, and I know this isn't the topic of today's session, use of force training and things like that, but my point is to talk about throughout all the training, we have an opportunity to assess these recruits that are now in the academy to make sure that we go back to, are they a person of good character? Somebody that we want to begin serving the 10 million residents of LA County. And we do have an attrition rate for various reasons. Some of it is that we determine that they're not suitable for law enforcement, and some of it is they determine themselves that this career is not for them. So generally speaking, and it varies by class, but our attrition rate is hovering in this phase of the process. About 18 to 20% of the recruits do not complete the academy training for a variety of reasons, because again, the recruit training officers assess them, and they even have peer assessments, which we find out throughout the academy from their peer ratings that there may be an issue with this recruit. And we've had some where we've had to look into these peer evaluations and separate that person from the sheriff's department. And then there's other training hurdles that throughout their career that they go through. And the most important one, though, which is an assessment where we tend to have people not make it off of this field training program that we have. When we put them out in the black and white with a field training officer, usually they have 2 different ones during the 6 months, and we assess them for their ability to serve the community, how they react under pressure. Are they calm? Can they deal with difficult situations? Are they following their training? Do they know how to de-escalate? Can they implement that when they go into a situation to practice what we trained them in de-escalation techniques and things of that nature? So the field training program is, I would say, usually one of our areas that we have another attrition, I guess, percentage. It probably used to not be as high, but nowadays, again, it's about 20% on average across the entire department, from the variety of stations that we have from different communities that they go out to. But this is typically at a 20% attrition rate. And I could pause here for a second for any kind of questions about our training program as far as how it assesses our deputies.
The only question I would add, Commander, is, after the initial Academy Training Bureau of 22 weeks, you did say that there was other training opportunities. To be exact, how often are those training opportunities? Do they come around, and how often are officers evaluated physically and mentally to ensure that they are up to speed and they meet the criteria that you're looking for in the sheriff department? Like, for an example, could it be that many incidents could be avoided because we catch these bad apples, if you will, for the lack of a better term? We didn't catch them when they came through the academy, but there was a red flag after they were sworn in. So how often are these officers evaluated physically and mentally?
The training program for the new deputies that go to the jail is 6 weeks of jail operation school, and then they are on probation for their first year with the sheriff's department. That gives us an opportunity to separate them for no cause. And they're on a evaluation program where they get evaluated weekly by a training officer for their first 3 months that they're in the jail. And then they get signed off on probation after their 1 year by their unit commander, a captain, but they're obviously assessed by the sergeants and other staff that supervise this deputy. And the same thing with the field training program, when they go out to a field training assignment, that they're in a position where they're being assessed on their weekly. They're required to do observation reports on their performance written for every trainee that we document their training program. And that program, that's also another program that's inspected by post. But the jail training program is we have monitors in the jail that monitor our training programs there too, that do federal or other consent decrees that we have in jail operations. But I want to add one other thing, and this kind of is a segue, Pastor, to the next topic. It kind of related, but we do have, based on the supervisor's assessment that they do annually and constantly of critiquing and reviewing performance at incidents, is we have the opportunity to do a fitness for duty assessment on the employee. Should we, as a sergeant, as a unit commander, feel that there's something that may not be right with this employee, we would outsource, if you would, this assessment to occupational health. These doctors assess the ability, and this could be for potential mental health or psychological non-compatibility with law enforcement issue. And they have other processes if there's a physical issue where there's maybe something physically wrong with the employee, this assessment. But we do have that opportunity to refer these individuals to a fitness for duty assessment done by the psychologists who help us out greatly over at occupational health in the county.
I love it,
And
Commander.
if I may add to that, Pastor, in terms of psychological fitness for duty evaluation, it is not something that is done on a regular basis. There are no agencies that yearly or every other year assess the fitness of the individual. It is done. It is a viable approach when there has been, as Commander stated, there are some objective, observable evidence that this person is not doing their job or is, whether there is dereliction of duty or extreme use of force or other issues, that there is objective, observable evidence that has already been addressed by the chain of command, that in terms of whether it is training, supervision, discipline, medical leave of absence, and it has not remitted, and it is escalating and bringing up that it may be an issue that lies within the person's emotional or psychological condition. Under those conditions and cases, the law enforcement agencies can refer or request or mandate the psychological fitness for duty evaluation of that officer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And so I'd like to go talk about my last topic area. If I can have the next slide, please. Is Psychological Services Bureau. This is a service for our employees' wellness. If I can have the next slide, please. And their role is to provide psychological services to the employees. And obviously their job is focusing on the health and well-being of the employees and the organization. They do work with leadership at the unit, the supervisor, manager, and executive level to help develop programs and initiatives in the department for the well-being of our employees and the smooth functioning of our department. They're involved in training our staff. They do quite a bit of training for our recruits and field operations staff and staff throughout the entire department, including our custody. And if I can have the next slide, please. The we're kind of split between two areas. The employee support services part, that's more the clinical area where deputies can come in to visit for a variety of issues, from family issues, workplace issues that they may be experiencing. And as part of this, we do mandated critical incident debrief. So if a employee has been involved in or witnessed a critical incident, be it a significant use of force, such as a shooting or an incident where somebody unfortunately died, be it an employee or a citizen, we have the ability, some are mandated, some are at the option of the unit commander, where they go and it's a visit with one of the psychologists and to do a debrief. The individual will do a debrief with the psychologist and give them an opportunity. And excuse me, if there's the feeling that there needs to be a follow-up for some issue that may manifested itself, that the psychologist will communicate that back to the chain of command, that maybe there's something else that we need to look at with this. But it's a good tool that gives our employees an opportunity to maybe work through, if you would use that term, any kind of critical incidents that they've been involved in. And then the other part of the operation is the organizational development and operation support. It's they work with unit commanders, supervisors, and managers to keep the unit running smoothly, or helping them develop programs within their units to help with the wellness of their and good functioning and high performance of their both law enforcement staff and professional staff that support the department.
Commander, I hate to interrupt, but if in fact we can stick a pin here and circle back if we have time on the back end, if you will be willing to stay with us just to keep the train on the railroad tracks as it relates to time management. Thank you so much. It has been so informative and helpful. I hope that you will stay aboard, and at the end we can circle back. I want to raise one question to you as it relates to this. Thank you so much, Commander. I want to circle back to our LAPD analyst, Michael Rose. I think we have been fortunate to get reconnected back to him, and I want to give him some time to elaborate on the hiring process there at LAPD.
Thanks, Pastor. Yeah, sorry about that. I had some technical issues with my computer, but I'm back. So I think we left off just at the tail end of the civil service, well, at the tail end of the pre-employment selection process for us. So when candidates go to the oral interview for the psychological evaluation, as I was mentioning, information obtained during the written psychological evaluation, as well as the backgrounds process and the PHS are considered during that interview. It's about a 2-hour interview with the candidates. And then once that's complete, candidates are ready for certification, which again, the certification, their rank on the eligible list is going to be determined by their score on the department interview. Kind of going back just to our overall hiring strategies, we have similar strategies. We're trying to have a police force that is representative of the society as a whole. So on the recruitment side, we are trying to increase diversity. The department goals for the personnel department were to increase diversity in Asian Pacific Islander, female, and African American candidates 5%. That's in terms of hires. This fiscal year, we were able to achieve that for African American API candidates. We didn't quite achieve that for female candidates, but that will continue to be a goal going forward. And just kind of touching on how the current circumstances have affected our hiring process. Due to social distancing restrictions, a lot of our testing process has gone online. Our multiple choice test is currently online. That's hopefully more available to a larger pool of candidates. It's anytime, anywhere. So hopefully it gives candidates who might have other responsibilities, might be in other areas, geographic regions, opportunities to participate in our selection process. Our department interview has moved from an in-person panel to a Skype format. So candidates are again able to call in over Skype without having to come in and maybe risk their health and safety. Our psychological evaluation, we've been using telepsych during the in-person interviews. So again, just that's a recent adjustment that we've made given the current social distancing restrictions. And that's a continuing efforts by us. We're trying to increase anytime, anywhere testing opportunities and make it possible for candidates in other geographic regions to participate in the process. That's pretty much it until through the certification and appointment to academy selection process. So if there are any questions, I can take those now. Or
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Rose. I don't mean to be redundant, but I want to give you the same question that I gave our commander, and that is, what percentage of Black people fail psychological exams?
The overall number for psych, I don't have that off the top of my head, unfortunately. We do look at adverse impact in the selection process, but unfortunately, off the top of my head, I don't have that number for you.
And when you say adverse impact, can you elaborate?
Yeah, so any specific groups, whether it be gender, ethnicity, that are being passing certain test parts at a lower rate, would indicate adverse impact. So that's something we've considered with the development of each test part. Multiple choice test, our switch to that is hopefully going to eliminate some adverse impact that might have happened during the PQE and the raters influence. And we look at that during each test part.
Is there a process to choosing background investigators based upon the candidate, or is it how is background investigators selected in the hiring process for LAPD?
So in terms of which candidates are assigned to backgrounds investigators, it's for the most part a workload issue. Obviously, there can't be any conflict of interest if it's determined that a background investigator would know or have any past relationship with a candidate where there might be a conflict of interest there, they wouldn't be assigned to that case. But for the most part, it's a workload that's taken into consideration.
It's a workload that is taken
for the background investigators, their workload, how many cases are assigned to them. But again, taking into consideration if there are any conflicts of interest with that case being assigned to the individual.
Got you. How many officers is in LAPD, Mike?
So currently we have 10,000, well, slightly under 10,000. That used to be our goal, is to have 10,000 officers. This coming fiscal year, we'll be hiring about half as many as we've traditionally done, so we will dip under that number. But that's an effort, in addition to budgetary restrictions, it's also an effort to kind of focus on quality over quantity and maybe kind of focus more on screening in as opposed to screening out. So getting more stronger candidates and really focusing on that as opposed to focusing just on keeping that 10,000 number. So slightly under that number.
I love it. I don't mean to put you on the spot. This will be my final question. Do you have any numbers in your head, percentage-wise, of the makeup of LAPD from an ethnicity standpoint?
Right. Well, in terms of testing, we try to increase African American testers. It's normally 12 to 14% going through the process and being appointed. Are African American. For female,
12 to 14% going through the process and going through the academy?
Correct. Well, being appointed to the academy. During the academy, there's an 8% overall attrition rate. That I would need to look at the specific breakdowns for the different gender and ethnic groups during the academy.
I love it. You've been very insightful, very helpful today. Thank you for circling back to us.
Great. Thank you.
All right. If you will commit to stay on board, I'm sure those who are viewing and watching us, we'll get some questions for the panelists at the end. We certainly want to give sufficient time to our final panelists today. Greg Woods, who is a professor at the San Jose State University. Professor Woods teaches with the Department of Justice Studies at San Jose State University, the Department of Sociology at the University of San Francisco, and the San Jose Police Department, where he regularly presents policing in the current political and social climate to new police academy graduates. Professor Woods conducted training seminars through a foreign language interpreter to top Beijing police officials from the Ministry of Security of the People's Republic of China, emphasizing sources of legal authority, limitations to the use of force, and legal remedies in response to police misconduct. Professor Woods has also lectured at Cal State East Bay, Sonoma State, and San Francisco State Universities. A respected legal trend and law enforcement expert, Professor Woods is regularly featured on television and radio programs, podcasts, and in print. Good morning, Professor Woods. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Good morning, Pastor. Can you hear me okay?
Man, I can hear you great. I can hear you great.
Oh, good, good. It's such a privilege to be here. I think that this is probably one of the most urgent issues that we need to be discussing, and that is what the ideal candidate for, our sheriff's department, the largest sheriff's department in the nation, the oldest sheriff's department in the state. I think this is a crucial issue to be discussing, and I'm very, very happy to be here today.
Man, we are excited to have you. I love the energy that you bring already. So listen, Professor Woods, can you give a brief description of the course you developed for the San Jose Police Department? Tell us about that.
Sure. It's called Policing in the Current Political and Social Climate. And it's not just for the San Jose Police Department. This is a training program, the first of its kind, that I'm actually proud to announce that I'm discussing, unrolling, and presenting to a number of agencies throughout California and hopefully the nation. So this is a conversation that we need to have, and that is the big picture of the legacy of policing in the United States. Where does this legacy come from? Where do these institutions, and I might add that the sheriff's institution is very unique in the function that it delivers for the community, the custodial function and the patrol function. Let's take a look at the justice system for a second. We can really break it down into three components: law enforcement, courts, and corrections. And if we think about the function of the sheriff, they're on both ends of the game. They serve the patrol function by going out into the community, forging these credible relationships, hopefully with the community, so that they can promote public safety, answer calls for service. But let's step back a second. Let's talk about that custodial function, that correctional function. Who is it that we might look to be the jailer? Who is it that keeps and maintains these human beings once they have been found guilty, or once they have been determined to be maybe not worthy of bail, and they're staying in that custodial situation waiting for their trial to occur so that they might become pronounced guilty beyond reasonable doubt? So we're looking at an agency that is the oldest in the state, the largest in the nation. And we're looking at the ideal candidate that can do two things uniquely: the custodial function and also the patrol function. So I'd love to discuss these things as they relate to the ideal candidate with you.
Good stuff. As it relates to the course, policing in the current political and social climate, what mechanism, what's the success rate of that? I know you are excited about it. You authored it. You penned it. It's your baby. How have you tracked the impact of the content of the course? What impact has this course made on trainees? Has it made on recruits? Has it made on not just the San Jose Police Department, but other agencies that have reviewed and implemented?
Well, you know, the course is the first of its kind. It's an integration of both the dark history, a critical interpretation of the role and responsibility of law enforcement, how certain members within our community might not necessarily receive those law enforcement officers as friends, more like the enemy, more like an occupying force. And so this is something that we've been dealing with at least since Memorial Day. But let's step back a second. We can go back 5 years. We can go back to Ferguson, Missouri in the summer of 2014. We can go to Staten Island in the summer of 2014. We can go back up here in the Bay Area where I'm from, and we can stand on the BART platform at the Fruitvale station on 2009 New Year's Day, and we can talk about Oscar Grant, because we didn't track officer-involved shootings until that became something of a national consciousness, a flashpoint, and we began tracking those officer-involved shootings, and that didn't start until 2015. We are now 5 years removed from Ferguson, and now we're talking about Minneapolis. We're talking about dismantling the Occupy Zone in Seattle today. We're a day after the great state of Mississippi has voted to remove the Confederate battle flag from their state flag. This is the year 2020, and I might add, if we go back in time, tomorrow we commemorate the death of Robert Peel, Sir Robert Peel, who in 1829 authored the Metropolitan Police Act in London. Very much the same socioeconomic factors at play in London in 1829 that we have at play now in the United States, and this reimagination of what a police force can be and what the professional policing profession can actually offer the community. And so we go back tomorrow commemorating the death of Robert Peel. That very same year, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department started and mirrored the evolution and development of the state of California and mirrored the development of the community of California. And I might add, if we go back into history, which we emphasize in our course, let's think about the war with Mexico. The reason why we had Americans on the West Coast in 1850, that year that we created the Sheriff's Department, is because many of these people discovered the West Coast and the beauty of the California sun for the very first time when they were fighting the Mexicans. They just happened to stay here. And so if we think about the posse and the position of an elected official that a sheriff provides and all that we look to law enforcement to do, in the absence of law enforcement, time and again throughout our nation's history, vigilante groups have grown in and out of fashion. As we dismantle the CHOP zone in Seattle today, as we examine this notion of reimagining and defunding law enforcement agencies. You know, as I listen to Dr. Souris and Mr. Rose and Commander Rosso today, I'm reminded that we need to be ever vigilant when it comes to recruitment, retention. But as I'm also reminded by policing in the current political and social climate, we must be mindful of community. We must be mindful of culture. And I'm also reminded of another word that begins with C, and that is what the commander and Dr. Souris so importantly reminded us of, and that is the word that begins with C, character. And law enforcement is to character what carbon is to steel. We need to trust those individuals who are put into a position to respond to those calls for service, to improve public safety in a way that is consistent with the notions of the community. And that's why it's essential that the Sheriff Civilian Oversight Commission continues in its mission, and the kinds of forums that we're interacting with today are crucial to continue. But this is the type of stuff that we would be discussing throughout the course, Policing in the Current Political and Social Climate.
Wow. Listen, I love it. We need to trust, but however, we live in a day climate that there is so much distrust. Professor, let me ask you, in this season of reimagining law enforcement, give us, in your estimation, an ocean in a drop. What does a good cop look like, and how do we go about by retaining he or she?
A good cop looks like us. A good cop is a willing police officer. And I might add, a creative problem solver, a communicator. One of the things that we're discussing is de-escalation of tension, the alternatives to the use of force. The primary alternative to the use of force is using your words. How is it that we might inspire someone to trust the intentions of a law enforcement officer when a person is at their most desperate? And that's where de-escalation techniques, crisis intervention techniques take place. And so as we examine what Commander Rosso was describing in regard to the regimen of training for a brand new police officer or a sheriff's detective or deputy, we must also consider how we might be able to have those creative problem-solving interactions by communicating. And so, yes, I think that it's crucial that Sheriff Villanueva is targeting the community and having a community-based recruitment policy. But let's also consider that from the community comes the ability to communicate. And if we think about those diverse communities like we have in Los Angeles, like we have throughout California, your ability to speak languages other than English will be absolutely rewarded. And so if we can craft credible relationships with the long term in mind, maybe begin identifying such willing candidates in preschool, maybe go through a robust candidate program that might involve cadets throughout elementary, junior high, high school, employ all of the power that the county might have at its disposal to continue an ongoing recruitment retention effort that is community-based. Ultimately perpetuating the best of culture premised by character.
Professor, have you noticed a change in the relationship between the community there where you are and the San Jose Police Department?
I have, but this is a unique story in San Jose that goes back to the beginning of the independent police auditor back following what occurred in Los Angeles in 1992. The impact of Los Angeles in 1992, I might add the impact of Los Angeles in 1965 with the uprising in Watts, helps us to better appreciate that relationship between law enforcement and community. And in San Jose, the story was less drastic when it comes to the destruction of property and life, but the people were put on notice. And we had some high-profile officer-involved shootings throughout the 1970s. And so when 1992 rolled around, we had an independent police auditor that began to accumulate greater and greater authority to have oversight over law enforcement, which is answerable to the city council. And so if we think about those roles and responsibility that we might have for an independent police auditor to create greater oversight, particularly in those areas where we have use of force, we can now look at what has most recently occurred. And following the most recent events beginning, I would say, Memorial Day, the mayor of San Jose has come out with 9 points of reform to actually increase oversight from 3 areas: from the mayor, from the citizens, and then also from the independent police auditor. And so I think the relationship is changing and it's becoming more reform-minded. And what's most important about this movement right now that is not unique to California, but I think all over the nation, is that we have people who are interested in law enforcement. We have people who are interested in the way that law enforcement officers are conducting themselves and the way through which a person becomes a law enforcement officer. And again, that's why it's crucial for us to be having this conversation today, Pastor.
Well, I certainly appreciate it. Thank you so much for your passion that you bring to the conversation. I think this is a good time to interact, have the panelists, you, Professor Woods, and our analyst of LAPD, Michael Rose, our Chief of Psychological Services for LA County, Dr. Souris, and certainly our commander for the Sheriff Department, to interact one with the other. I mean, we've been on the call for the last hour and a half. Just before we get to Q&A with those viewers who have been listening attentively and waiting patiently to add to this robust conversation, I want to give you, the panelists, an opportunity to interact one with the other. As Professor Woods have regurgitated some of the statements of our previous speakers, which proves that he's been listening. How do you guys feel about what you've been saying? You guys been going one at a time. How do you guys feel about what's been said? I'm talking to the panelists.
I'll begin if you can hear me. Dr. Souris' 10 dimensions really helped me to appreciate the personality trait that we're looking for, particularly when it comes to fitness for duty. So thank you for that, Doctor.
Dr. Souris, are you still there?
Yes.
Are you still with us?
Yes, it's my pleasure, and thank you so much for the information that you added in terms of character, and certainly everyone on the panel added. Again, to talk about fitness for duty evaluations, they are not done it's not a frivolous evaluation that is done. Certainly, as the commander stated, that there are many times that the officer is evaluated on their performance, but again, fitness for duty evaluations have sort of a narrow focus and are looking at the person when there has been observable evidence. And the 10 psychological dimensions that I mentioned, thank you for mentioning them again. They are set forth by California Post, and I know that several states, other states than California, have adopted them. So it certainly goes to their credit for coming up with those dimensions that are observable and measurable.
All right. I love it. I love it. Having said that, we're going to make it our business to get to our attendees who are viewing. Just before, Dr. Souris, give us your final remarks, and then we will go to Michael Rose, and then to our commander, and we'll end with our professor in a ocean in a drop. Give us your final comments. I don't think we can hear you.
To reiterate what Professor Wood said, this is a great time for all of us to be having this conversation. I think for the drop to the ocean, there needs to be a lot of waves that are occurring at the same time. So I think that this force, especially the Sheriff's Civilian Oversight Committee and other committees that are working for the same purpose, are those ways to start helping all of us understand what's at stake, understand and try to do sort of a need assessment and improve if it is within the background recruitment aspect, improve that. If it is within the psychological or pre-employment medical, to improve that, while we are taking into consideration and incorporating what the community is saying, what are some of the benefits that the community is deriving, and what are some of the disadvantages, or as Mr. Rose said, adverse impact that is coming to the community. Again, the policing work, as Professor Woods mentioned, is a very critical job, at the same time very strenuous, very sort of a difficult position that members of the community who have become sworn personnel have to go through, and to making sure that their mental health is also looked at and taken care of is another aspect of it, which again, I think based on my experience with Sheriff's Department and LAPD, that they both have counseling available to them. So making sure that we shore up those ends of the spectrum as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. A wealth of resource. We appreciate you, Dr. Souris. Michael Rose.
Thank you. Yeah, and I agree. Hiring really has to focus as much as possible on community-based policing, and we really need to make sure the hiring process is selecting the candidates who are most reflective of the community and are going to serve the community appropriately. So it's looking at the entire selection process. It could be during the interview, providing a more realistic job review, making sure that candidates understand the position that they're applying for, have a firm knowledge of why they're applying for this specific department, and make sure they understand what they're getting into. And then, as the other speakers have mentioned, just making sure that there's a comprehensive psychological evaluation, and the backgrounds investigation is comprehensive, and making sure that candidates are being assessed fairly, and that we're representing the community appropriately. I think all of those efforts are important going forward.
Thank you so much. Our commander, Los Angeles Sheriff's Department.
Thank you, Pastor, for this opportunity today. I would have to summarize my statement is that character does count, and we assess from the time they are an applicant and throughout their career, we assess this of our deputy sheriff. I do want to say that I think this is a very beneficial forum to the community, so they can become aware of the processes that law enforcement use to select their law enforcement officers for their community. Based on our department's practices, and also that we're regulated through POST, the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission. I think this is very beneficial. The more the public knows about this, I think it can help with the level of confidence that they have in their law enforcement agency.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Commander. And last but not least, our professor, you'll circle back. Give us the truncated version, Professor.
Truncated version. Who in their right mind would want to be a law enforcement officer at this particular time in history? Who? So now that we've gotten the elephant out of the room, let's also take a look at another uncomfortable fact, and that is that we have occupational hazards associated with this particular profession. Substance abuse, rates of divorce. Need I even use the word suicide? All you need do is a simple search, and you will find that these are very real factors to consider. So again, who in their right mind would want to do this? Well, that brings us back to character and integrity, and a commitment to service and community. And so hopefully it'll be a person who will be wanting to assume these responsibilities, these duties for all the right reasons. And it's our responsibility to make sure that that happens.
Wow. Thank you so much. Listen, it's been a joy to moderate and facilitate this discussion today. Again, I personally want to thank our chair lady, Patty Giggins. I want to thank again our executive director of the COC, the Honorable Mr. Brian Williams, and his competent staff. I've had a blast today. I want to turn it over to the staff of Mr. Williams. Jennifer Osborne, it's on you.
Excellent. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We do have some community members who are already queued up for questions. For those of you who are listening via the WebEx, if you would like to ask a question, please go to the participant list and find the hand. Go ahead and raise your hand and that will put you in queue. If you have any questions, you can also send a chat to the host. We will take our first question from Sadika Smith. Please go ahead with your question.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is going to Dr. Souris's point about the qualities, psychological qualities that a police officer or a law enforcement officer should have. And I'm wondering about brain development and adolescence, and how adolescents, because of brain development, usually have poor impulse control. So has there been any conversation around raising the age requirement for a person to become a law enforcement officer? And also adding to that question, has there been any discussion about changing requirements in terms of education or additional work experience before a person becomes a law enforcement officer?
Thank you. And panelists, you can go ahead and answer her questions.
Hello, this is Commander Andy Rosso. I can talk specifically about a couple of things with the Sheriff's Department. So in 2021, we are currently working on a plan to roll out a minimum education requirement for our applicants, that it would be a associate's degree. We do want to make sure we tailor the requirement so it doesn't exclude members of our community that may have joined the military out of high school or something of that nature. And the reason that we feel that the educational component is a benefit for our employees is that the education environment, going to class, working with fellow students, working with professors, it involves you in the community. You aren't coming from just law enforcement training. You're getting an education with the members of the community that you live in, and we think that it can benefit our candidates and our applicants if they have this a degree requirement that we're looking to implement in 2021. As far as the age requirement, we have not looked at that, but I think that's something that's a good discussion topic.
Jennifer, are you there?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I was speaking on mute. Did we have any other comments to that question from Shadika? All right, looks like we're ready to move on to the next question. Will come from Marie Valdez. Marie, please go ahead with your question.
Hi, so I had a question on what role does nepotism play in hiring deputies for the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, and what percentage of deputies have a relative in the department?
Thank you.
Hello, it's Commander Rosso again. So we do have a candidates, applicants that have family members that are on the department, be it a parent, an aunt, an uncle, a sibling, or whatever the case might be. And they are through the same background process as any other applicant. So there's not a level of favoritism. However, that would be a benefit to them having a family member on the department that they would have during the application process. But I do want to say I don't have an exact number to give you. We don't really track that kind of information as far as if they have a relative that's either a current or past member. But it is something that we do see, that if a parent or family member is involved in law enforcement, that there is a slightly higher probability that a child or a relative would also pursue a similar career that they see a family member involved in throughout the year.
Okay, thank you. And our next question will come from Mel Gardner. Please go ahead with your question, Mel.
Hi, my question is about conflicts of interest. I want to know what activities and affiliations are considered a conflict of interest. The reason I ask is because Daniel Hernandez's murderer, Officer Tony McBride, promoted the gun company Terran Tactical Innovations, and she competitively engaged in shooting events. While training is very exciting and might be cool and all, if your officers are actively engaging in activities that condition them to respond with deadly force, all your training with de-escalation is not going to work, which can be seen in the multitude of videos of her online conditioning herself to respond with force, which is exactly what she did in the case of Daniel Hernandez. So once again, what activities and affiliations are considered a conflict of interest for potential officers?
Thank you for that question. Would we have a panelist who would like to take that question?
I just want to, for my benefit, I'm not that familiar with, I recognize the name, but I'm not that familiar with what agency the incident occurred with, Daniel Hernandez. But regardless, that so as far as that type of affiliation, obviously that is if it's a paid or work or something like that, and stuff's posted on social media, we would be aware of it and we would assess it. And each one, obviously, I agree with that. The purpose of the deputy out in the field is to at times de-escalate the situation, depending on what they're coming across and what they're dealing with. But that is something that we train in the academy. But we would, during the assessment process, we do look at things such as impulse control. I know the doctor briefed that earlier, and this would be something that we would look at during the background process and also the psychological examination. That things, if there's issues with impulse control, could come up depending on their work experience or their job, dealing with customers and other things in a variety of areas and formats. We would see that, but we do not necessarily have a conflict of interest, other than if they're involved in some kind of enterprise that would be considered obviously criminal activity, but we consider that non-compatible with law enforcement. And I don't know if anyone other panel member has a comment on that.
Okay. Thank you for that. Our next question will come from Carolina Goodman. Please go ahead with your question, Carolina.
Yes, it's Carolina. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. I have a quick comment and a question. The comment has to do with the fact that LAPD and LASD must follow post. Of course, they must follow those guidelines. But my point here is that perhaps post should be reevaluated, just like we are reevaluating everything in the criminal justice system in this day and age. And my question really has to do with something that the professor said about viewing what the police department, what their philosophy is, how they're viewed in the community. Let me bring it to a on-the-ground example of an African-American family who says, we do not want our children in the police department. Why would we want them to control our community? Now, if that family felt that the police department is there to care for community, I imagine this family would say, yes, let's have our son or daughter apply. We want them to care for our community. So my question really is, how do we change the messaging about policing being a department that cares for community as opposed to controlling community?
Thank you for that, Carolina. I'm not sure, Professor Woods, would you like to take this one?
I would. Carolina, thank you for your question. And it's really good knowing that someone is out there listening to us today. So thank you very much. I really believe that this goes back to culture. Many of those impressions that are had in so many households are had around the breakfast table, are had between child and parent at a very early age. Now, what is the likelihood that a child will have a positive interpretation of the role and responsibility of law enforcement if the only time they see law enforcement is when they roll into the neighborhood or home to incarcerate a family member, never to be seen again or only to be seen through the security mechanisms that the county jail might provide? And so if we have these early impressions, it's really hard to undo a bad first impression, particularly if it comes during the formative stage of a child. Now let's multiply that critical interpretation of the role and responsibility of law enforcement by generations. Let's go ahead and just start the clock. Oh, I don't know, we talked about 1850. How about 1865? How about 1964? How about Fair Housing Act in 1968? When do we start the clock exactly? 1992? How about Memorial Day? When do we begin to actually reassess the interpretation of the role and responsibility of law enforcement within the community, particularly when the community is as diverse as those communities that we are so happy about being from here in California, so prideful about being a part of? And so if we think about those community members, let's think about policing by consent, community policing. And if we reimagine what policing and what law enforcement can be, let's go ahead and reimagine it with a greater interaction between law enforcement and community, so that community can ultimately be in the front seat when it comes to the scrutiny associated with law enforcement policy. And ultimately, that means that through this notion of policing by consent or law enforcement through consent, when we experience these kinds of bumps in the road that we so often occur throughout our American experience, we're going to be more likely to absorb the shock and move forward as opposed to being stagnant and maybe moving backwards, 2 steps forward, 6 steps back. So thank you for your question. I think that it welcomes the conversation about culture and how is it that we might be able to have a more, I don't know, let's borrow a word from the 1992 era, a kinder, gentler interpretation of what law enforcement might be. Maybe the Andy Taylorization, to throw a term from the Wayback Machine. A law enforcement officer that might not carry a handgun. What might that appear like? Maybe like what happens in London? Not that we have these diverse cultures from London and California, but it's not truly the Wild West, is it? And if it is, then how do we account for more officer-involved shootings in the state of California than anywhere else in the nation? And if we're talking about officer-involved shootings, let's talk about those attacks on police officers, which are increasing by the day. So we have tension in the community. And the only way that we're going to be able to address that is by working to change our culture. And I thank you for the question.
Thank you very much for that response. Next question will come from Michelle Infante. Please go ahead with your question, Michelle.
Morning. My question is, for both LASD and for LAPD is a complete failure to the community. You give a psych test, but you allow your officers to complete the academy and they have no empathy, they have no conscience, they have no education or lack thereof, and they have absolutely no communication skills. And so I hear all this talk about further education after they get out of the academy. What are you doing from the very beginning? Are you using the MMPI? And if you're not using the MMPI test, the Minnesota multifaceted personality inventory, if you're not using that, then what test are you using? Because both agencies, you guys are a complete failure to our community. People are getting killed.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And then did you have a question for one of the panelists?
Psychological test are you guys using, LAP, LSD, to avoid people?
Thank you for that question. Thank you for that question, Michelle. If either of the panelists would like to respond now.
Of the tests that are being utilized, we are using MMPI-2RF and also using the norms that are for police and public safety officers and candidates. There is also a test of normal, because it's required for us to use a test of abnormal pathology as well as normal behaviors. In terms of normal behaviors, either CPI or California Personality Inventory is used, or 16 personality factor is used. In some cases, we also use personality assessment inventory, again, normed for the candidates of public safety. So those tests, again, make up some parts of it. The evaluation itself is also dependent on the interview. What we need to consider is that individuals may come into the testing or may come in as recruits that are appearing to have the characteristics. However, there are things that happen in each person's life, and those are the things that also need to be considered in terms of, as you brought up, empathy and education, training, and ability to integrate the education, ability to integrate new information from the community, etc. So it's not a process that kind of is ending with the pre-employment psychological evaluation, but the person goes ahead and develops. And as one of the first participants who had a question brought up, the brain development occurs as well. And I do believe that sometimes we need to look at the age within which we are recruiting and perhaps increase that age. Thank you.
Thank you for that response. And next up, we have Sylvia Gonzalez Youngblood. Please go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a special needs advocate, and I do work on...
Actually, Sylvia, we are having a difficult time hearing you. Could you speak a little closer to the microphone?
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you
Yes.
hear me now? Okay. I do a lot of work on the school to prison pipeline, and when my son was in the first grade, his principal and teacher said that he would end up in jail or in prison. So they already marked him for what he was going to be. He's in the Air Force now. He's 25 and he's married. He's happy, healthy, and thriving, and he would love to go into law enforcement after he gets out of the Air Force. And I went through that scenario just so that you could have an idea of what goes on in the community. He's triracial. He's Native American, Mexican, and Black. But people already have kids pegged out before they even begin life. And that's something that has to be dealt with. And as a parent, I wanted him to succeed. So what I would like to know is, when I'm not for defunding the police, what I am for is, instead of defunding, is the police department having on staff special needs advocates, mental health experts, family counselors, those people in-house at the police department, not expecting the police officers to do it, but maybe have a unit on the side where they're housed right next to the police department 24 hours a day. And if a call comes in, you have a 15-year-old boy with mental health issues who the mother can no longer control, you're like, okay, we need a special needs advocate, we need a mental health service provider to go out that special needs advocate like me can ask those identifying questions to the parent. Okay, does your son have an IEP? Does your son have a Section 504? Does he have a behavioral support plan in place in school? So, because police officers don't know to ask those identifying questions.
Thank you for that, Sylvia. Thank you. So I just wanted to say, do you have a specific question for one of the panelists?
Yeah, has that idea been kind of thought of in the police department to kind of expand the police department to not only be police officers, but to also include that additional staff so they can go out on calls with police officers, because police officers have a job to do. They're not all doing other things. Okay.
Thank you for that question, Sylvia.
So I'll say that for LAPD, that is something specific or similar has been considered recently, development of a position that might be handled for nonviolent situations. That's very preliminary, but the discussions have been had about possibly creating a position that would be called on, as opposed to having police officers go out to these nonviolent situations.
I would like to add to that there are programs available, not programs, but units available. There is a Sheriff's Department unit called MET that works with, there's a Sheriff's Deputy as well as a mental health clinician that goes out on calls, on critical calls where there is some level of violence. I'm not talking about actual violence, but some level of escalating behavior that does the evaluation. There's also Department of Mental Health partnering with another law enforcement agency such as Sepideh Police Department, as well as Long Beach Police Department, that again, it's a unit of the peace officer going out with a mental health clinician to assess the mental health needs of the victim or the perpetrator, to ensure that those type of assessments are done and also escalation is done. You bring up a very good point in that we probably across the board in all law enforcement agencies, and again, going beyond our own state of California, need to increase the existence of those type of units that have a mental health professional, someone who has an overall good comprehension of mental health across ages and in a culturally relevant and competent manner to go out with peace officers and to help out in situations where not only de-escalation, but appropriate determination for that person the call is about is.
Thank you for that response. And just to respect everyone's time, we are going to take one last question right now. That question will come from Apollonia Sullivan. Apollonia, if you could please go ahead with your question. Apollonia, it seems like your computer, your phone may be muting you. Oh, we hear you now, Apollonia. Okay. Please go ahead with your comment or your question now.
Okay, thank you for that. I was about to hang up because I thought I couldn't connect. Thank you so much for having this these meetings that are very critical for community. I've heard a lot, and I'm a very active member in my community, which is Bassett, California, just very socioeconomically challenged, Hispanic based. So I'm pretty familiar with some of the issues. One of the issues that is not brought up, that after the 1960s, father figure has disappeared from Black America and now is beginning to trickle down in the Hispanic community. When you don't have that structure, then you're going to encounter a lot of social issues and understanding. I think that to fix what's going on, because I know there's something has to be fixed. There are problems, I acknowledge that. They're obvious, but you can't expect things that were working and then something falls off, which is the family structure and also the respect for authority, because there is some respect for authority in the code book of penal code.
Thank you for that, Apollonia. Did you have a specific question?
Yes. Does the training that everybody is advocating for include schools, public school systems where the damage is seen by the police officers a generation after? If that's not done, it's going to be hard to fix. Has anybody studied that, work on that, and put attention to that?
Thank you for that question, Apollonia. And would any of the panelists like to address that question about training in the schools?
Well, it's interesting that you should mention training in the schools. There's a movement now to remove law enforcement from schools. So I don't know what kind of training we can expect if we remove law enforcement from schools altogether. I believe that since schools are the incubator for our future, we must try to create a skill set that we develop throughout our scholastic system that helps each individual member of our community be successful. And if that means that we need to better appreciate what the justice system provides, and if through those lessons in school we can create greater trust by emphasizing those notions that are reflected in our Constitution, life, liberty, equal protection, due process, where it doesn't matter where you're from or who your daddy is or how much money you have, but we all have equal access to justice under the law. Then maybe when we see the human face of the justice system, and that is the human face that patrols, that is the human face that very well might be coming down the corridor in the jail to provide some sort of custodial or patrol function. When we lose faith and trust in those very institutions of justice and we feel that there is no justice, then, well, we become desperate. We believe in nothing. We embrace these anarchist tendencies that we see so severely portrayed in our news feeds. So I absolutely agree that we need to have this conversation, and it needs to begin in the preschool. We need to continue to have these sessions integrated throughout the school system that helps each individual child grow up to be a full-fledged member of society, and that means that they need to have the skills to be successful.
Thank you, Professor Woods, and thank you to all of our panelists who have joined us today. Again, allow me to wrap up today by giving a heartfelt thank you to everyone, panelists, participants, and those who have joined us. This is one out of many seminars, be it online or be it in person, that the COC endeavors to bring to the community. Again, it is our motto that leadership is partnership. It's a privilege to serve as a commissioner on the Civilian Oversight Commission for the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's our sincere hope that you've been enlightened, that you've been informed, and that there's been spotlight that has been shone upon the hiring process of choosing the right person for the job in law enforcement. It's been fun, but we got to run. Until next time, make it a great day.